Hi stamping friends, Melissa Kerman here with Melissa's Crafting Treehouse. Today I have a super fun project for you. It's a double pop-up slider card and it's made with the Animal Outing stamp set, the Dandelion Wishes stamp set, and also the Bokeh Dots stamp set, which is in the background on that smoky slate piece. So you can see I've pre-scored this piece of cardstock, and this is going to be my card body, and I've already done some punching ahead of time. I used actually a retired punch called the word window punch. I couldn't find an alternative to this as I just wanted to have that sort of recessed notch, if you will, and needed it to be flat across the bottom. So this is sort of my template that I had my team members use. So this was a team project, one of our make and takes. And so when they did it, I gave them their card body and they could use my template to figure out exactly the positioning for that punched out half circle. So if you're doing it at home, obviously you're just going to need to center it right there in the center of that particular panel. So I'm using a 1.5 inch circle punch here, and that little half circle will allow you to grab into the card and pull it open. Next, I'm going to work on the internal mechanism that allows this card to work. And you can see I have a strip of plastic. It's about, I don't know, 1 inch or 1.25 inches wide I cut it 12 inches. And I'm just using the plastic that goes around designer series paper, not the thin flimsy kind, but the kind that is actually a little bit more substantial. Those are usually found on the foil papers and that sort of thing. So you're not going to necessarily need that whole length, but that's what you're going to start with, and it just makes it easier to get it all set up. So I'm wrapping my plastic strip around the card base with, inside those notches that I created with the word window punch, putting a little piece of tear and tape at the very end of it, and it's a little hard to get that little piece of paper off, but I did it. And I'm justifying it a little bit towards the top, as you can see. So, and then just pulled over the top plastic piece and adhered it. Now I don't want it to be too snug, otherwise it will make it hard for the car to operate. So I just pulled it down and then just sort of released it ever so slightly so that it would be just the right amount of tightness. So you can see how it slides pretty easily. So the next thing I'm going to work on is stamping my focal piece, and what I've done on this one is done some masking so that some of the images look like they're in the foreground and some look like they're in the background. So the images that I want in the foreground I'm going to stamp first. So I've stamped my little rhinoceros, and now I'm stamping the kangaroo. And what I've done is I've taken these same images, stamped them on post-it notes, and then carefully cut out the shapes of those images just on the area that I would need them to be my mask. So I could have cut out the whole thing, but by not cutting them all out, I actually sort of have a handle to hold on to those pieces of post-it note. So you can see now I've stamped the giraffe, and the giraffe's going to look like it's in the background. And now I'm masking the giraffe. So I have just one more image to stamp. It's the leaves and a little frog. And I'm just going to go right over that giraffe, and it's going to look like it's behind the giraffe. And then I can remove my masks and check it all out. And sure enough, the leaves look behind the giraffe, and the giraffe is behind the hippo and the kangaroo. Pretty cool, huh? So next I'm going to do my stamping on the smoky slate piece of cardstock with the Bokeh Dots image, and I'm going to have to stamp it 3 times to cover the whole thing. And I'm just going to stamp the top and the bottom because those are the areas that will be seen the most. And then I am going to do the middle, but the lines that appear are going to really be covered up by the scalloped oval that I'm going to put on for the focal piece. Next I'm going to be stamping the inside pieces, starting with the sentiment, the Wild About You sentiment, which is from the Animal Outing stamp set. I just love this sentiment. And then I'm going to be using the Dandelion Wishes to just stamp some images in the pear pizzazz on the bottom, trying to leave a little bit of room at the top for writing a note, and then also all around the Wild About You. I am using first and second inking for some of those dandelion images on the top piece around the Wild About You image. Next, I'm going to be focusing on the focal piece, doing my coloring in with my Blends alcohol markers. And I'm going to start with the dark Blends alcohol marker that is Smoky Slate. And I'm using the smaller tip end, which gives you a little bit more control. And it's a little bit of a harder tip than the other end, which is more like a paintbrush. And you'll notice that on these images, the stamps are designed in such a way that it actually kind of gives you the clues as to where the shading should be. So it's really pretty easy to figure out where you want the darker parts. Now I'm coming in with the light Smoky Slate marker, and now I'm using the paintbrush end because I've got big areas that I want to color in, and I want it to be a little bit quicker. And so now I'll probably come back in and do a little bit of fine tuning, taking the light one and adding to some of the shading around the horn, and then going back in where the dark meets the light on the main body of the hippo, and just trying to soften those edges a little bit so it looks more natural in the way of shading. And now I'm going to focus on the giraffe, and I have my dark and my light alcohol markers there. I'm starting with my light one, the large tip, the paintbrush end, and I'm just going to color in pretty much the whole giraffe, except for those little dots, which I'm going to come back in later with a different color. So I'm doing my light first, and then I'm going to grab my dark and just do a little bit of shading in a few select spots. You can see around the ears and the, what are those little horns? And around the edges of the dots, the spots on the giraffe. And then you'll see there I have my bronze alcohol marker off to the right. I'm going to eventually use those. But before I do that, I'm coming in with my light alcohol marker and just kind of doing some of that same blending, going back over those areas where the dark and the light meet to soften the edges a little bit. And now just coming in with that bronze marker to color the dots. So I've used Bermuda Bay and Pumpkin Pie alcohol markers to color that little itty bitty bird, and I did actually do some of both the dark and light of both of those colors on the bird, as you'll see me doing here. So I just came in with the light, and I'm going to do a little bit of dark, do a little bit of shading, and then reduce it the same thing with the Pumpkin Pie alcohol markers, the light first, and then come in with a little bit of shading with the dark. You can see every single time I'm going back and forth between the dark and the light, and that's just to keep working on softening those hard edges so it really looks blended, which is really the beauty of the Blends alcohol markers. So now I'm using my ivory Blends alcohol marker for the sort of central section of the kangaroo. And there isn't a light and dark of the ivory, it's just one color. So I'm just going to use that one color either more or less in different spots to give me some shading. The rest of the kangaroo is colored with the light and dark crumb cake alcohol markers. So I'm coming in with the paintbrush end of the crumb cake to sort of color the whole thing. And then I'll come back in with the dark and do my shading. And then most likely I'll come back in with the light again and soften those edges, just like I've been doing. And the shading really makes the image come to life, I think. I mean, you can see that here as I'm doing the work on the kangaroo. So I don't really consider myself one to do a lot of coloring in, but the Blends alcohol markers make the process so fun and the outcome just more beautiful than any other coloring I've ever done. So it makes it really, really easy to feel a little bit like an artist, just super fun. So now I'm using the Old Olive light and dark alcohol markers, and I'm starting with the dark this time. You can really go either way, start with the light or the dark. So I'm doing my, my little highlighted shaded areas first, and then I'm going to come back in with the light. So just along the bottom of the branch and a few select spots on the leaves and the frog. And now I'm coming in with the light. And this is such a small image that you definitely want to use the smaller end where you have a little bit more control and it's a harder nib. So I'm getting pretty close to being done. I got a few little final touches. I have need to still do the koala. So I'm coming back in with my crumb cake. I really just forgot that, and I forgot the little arm of the kangaroo also. So got to come in and make sure it's all colored. So last but not least, I am using my color lifter to do some additional fine tuning and blending of any lines that seem a little bit severe or sharp to me. The color lifter essentially does remove some color, and it helps move the color around. It makes anything that's really solid look a little bit more mottled. So you can see I'm pulling some of the color on the horn into the whole horn, so it just softens and shades. That horn doesn't look quite so stark white. And now I'm done with my focal piece. You can see the Blends alcohol markers bleed through to the back side. I also stamped on the back side because I didn't like how I stamped it the first time. But the ink will naturally bleed through the paper, and it's not something to worry about. It's just what happens with this these inks. So you'll just want to make sure you're working on a work surface where if it bleeds through onto the surface, it's no big deal. So next I'm going to work on attaching the smoky slate stamped piece to the front of the card, and I like to actually cut out a little bit of a half circle that mirrors the circle that's going to be on the basic gray piece, and I tried to do it just by eyeball, and it didn't work out so well, so I took the same piece and put it on the front and then made a pencil mark on the back side as I just did, so that I'd know where to punch out the little half circle notch. So that's what I'm doing right here. So next I'm tying my Pear Pizzazz shimmer ribbon around the top of the smoky slate piece, and I'm just going to tie a knot and adjust the positioning with my finger, and I can bow up the piece of cardstock to move the position of the center to left to right, and now just trimming off the edges to make it look pretty. So the final steps are to assemble the card. So here's my card base, and I'm taking a piece of tear and tape, and I'm going to attach it right over where I actually attached the two plastic pieces to one another. So I superimposed it right over that, and the positioning is pretty important. You can see it's justified towards the top of what's going to be that panel I'm attaching, but I'm attaching the panel justified to the very bottom of the card base. So in this part is very, very important you do it exactly this way. So now I've got that inside piece done, and the image was facing up. So now I'm turning it over, and now I'm working on the other side. Now I'm placing my Wild About You focal piece in position so I can see where to put the tear and tape. So I really am looking at where is the bottom of that image going to be, or the piece of cardstock going to be. And so you can see it, I've justified it down sort of towards the bottom of the plastic. And then I'm going to attach my focal piece, but I'm going to turn it over so that it's actually facing in the same direction as the piece I attached just a minute ago. So I'm turning it over, putting it face down. That tear and tape at the bottom is going to attach to the bottom of the panel, and that Pear Pizzazz piece was justified towards the top. So here's my card in its functioning capacity. Yay, it worked! We're in the home stretch, so now all I got to do is attach those final pieces to the front, and there's my finished card. And I have not actually done the one last step, which is I put a little bit of tear and tape, very thin strip of tear and tape on that tiny little panel, and then here you'll see that I have to wrap that tiny little flap over so that it's around the focal piece. You see how I'm doing that right there? So I'm folding it around it so that the flap is on top of the focal piece. I'm trying to show you there so you can really see what I'm doing. And then I can just pinch the card together. So if you don't do that, you're going to actually squeeze the focal piece between the adhesive, and that would be very bad because this card will not work. So now you can see it works just perfectly, sliding it in and out. I did attach the focal piece with dimensionals, so it is popped up, and I didn't do that on camera, but sure you get the idea. So there's my finished product. I hope you like it. This is one of the most fun, unusual opening cards I think I've ever seen. And I did do one years ago, but it was so fun to redo it here and to do it with my team. So if you're a team member and you got this kit in the mail, I hope you'll enjoy playing with it. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with friends, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Have a great day and happy crafting!